Rule number 3. Look for the evidence before making up your mind. Here's an important word.
Scientific.
The scientist is a man who has learned how to think, at least about scientific matters. That's why he can do so many amazing things. Many people believe almost any darn thing they're told, especially if it sounds like something they already believe. But a scientist isn't supposed to believe anything much unless it's supported by evidence. Evidence is an important word, too. As you go through life, don't be quite so ready to accept things as true unless there's some kind of evidence or proof to back them up. For example, millions of people used to believe that the earth was flat. Yes, they really did. But gradually, scientific evidence showed that it was round. Even then, it took a surprisingly long time for the flat earth people to admit that they had been wrong. They resisted the new evidence for as long as they could. You'll discover that this is a very common thing. Lastly, don't make up your mind without enough evidence. Once upon a time, there were several blind men who were taken to a zoo to visit an elephant. One blind man reached out and felt the elephant's tail. "Ah," he said, "I see, an elephant is very much like a rope." The second blind man touched only the trunk. "Well, well," he said, "so an elephant is a thing like a snake." The third blind man felt one of the elephant's legs, so he thought that an elephant was a creature built like a tree. The fourth blind man happened to feel the elephant's big side. He thought the elephant, therefore, was like a wall. The fifth blind man, since all he touched was the ivory tusk, supposed that an elephant was something like a sword. These 5 men got into a terrible argument, and of course they were all wrong. Why?
Not enough evidence.
Right. A sixth blind man listened to the other 5, so he was able to figure out what an elephant really looked like. Look for the evidence before you're sure, or else your thinking is pretty poor. I'll be a little skeptical, play it cool, and you'll do a lot better when you go to school. I said, look for the evidence, ask for the proof, or else you're acting like an awful goof. Don't assume that everything you're told is true, 'cause they'll feed a little bit of nonsense. They'll feed a little bit of nonsense, so they'll feed a little bit of nonsense to you. And I'll look for the evidence before you're sure, or else your thinking is pretty poor. Be a little skeptical, play it cool, and you do a lot better when you go to school. Now, rule number 4, don't kid yourself. Which is to say, tell the truth to yourself as well as to others. As the saying goes, tell it like it is. If someone tells you something, you want them to tell it straight. Not to leave things out that should be there, or to lie or exaggerate. And so, when storytelling, if you're not a real whiz, just try to give the facts, my friend. Tell it like it is. You will think more clearly about something if what you say about it is correct. Jimmy Jones saw a man about 6 feet tall take a bicycle that belonged to Jimmy's friend, Bob. When Bob's father asked what the man looked like, Jimmy said,
"He was a great big guy."
Well, Bob said he'd seen plenty of tall men himself, so to try to top his friend, Jimmy said,
"Yeah, but this guy was really big. He was about 7 feet tall."
Jimmy really didn't intend to lie. He was just exaggerating. There are 2 kinds of exaggerations. One kind's okay. The other isn't. It's okay when you say,
"Boy, this hot dog tastes so good I could eat 1,000,000 of them."
or,
"I'll bet the Los Angeles Rams could beat the New York Jets by 1,000 points."
exaggerations of that sort couldn't possibly be true, so people understand them for what they are. But if you say that a 6-foot-tall man is 7 feet tall, that is misleading. If your grandfather gave you $2 as a birthday present, but you exaggerate and say he gave you $4, that kind of an exaggeration is pretty close to a lie. Now, it's bad enough to mislead other people with exaggerations and half-truths, but it's even worse to fool yourself. So whatever you're talking about, always try to state the facts as carefully and correctly as you can. If someone tells you something, you want them to tell it straight, not to leave things out that should be there, or to lie or exaggerate. And so, when storytelling, if you're not a real whiz, just try to give the facts, my friend. Tell it like it is. Now here's rule number 5. Understand the difference between the concrete and the abstract. Do those sound like hard words to understand? Well, they're not. Concrete is very easy to understand. One meaning of the word is that hard stuff they make sidewalks out of. But the first meaning is anything that you can touch is concrete. Whatever actually exists is considered something concrete. Baseballs, roller skates, trees, bicycles, rocks, dogs, cats. Everything in the world that you can see and touch really exists. There are other things you can talk about, but can never touch or see. Things like love, or freedom, or beauty, or democracy, or fear, or happiness. You can't hold a pound of freedom in your hand. You can't reach out and touch happiness. So these words are called abstract words. They're perfectly good words, and they usually refer to ideas that are important. Freedom is important, for instance. But you can't pick up a box full of freedom, can you? So that's another reason, another good reason, to learn how to think well. It helps you to become a better citizen of America and of the world. The concrete you can see or hear or feel. You're reasonably certain it is real. The abstract, on the other hand, cannot be seen. The kind of situations what we mean. For you can't buy a pound of freedom. You can't pick up a box of love. You can't hold a bag of happiness or gloom. You can't use faith to fill up a room. You can't buy a pound of beauty. You can't pick up a piece of joy. You can't see a bit of any abstract thing. Remember that, my boy. Rule number 6, use words carefully. What you have to do is try to be as careful with your use of words as scientists are with their test tubes and chemicals and currents of electricity and other things they work with. The reason is that we do most of our thinking with words, and most of our communicating with other people is done with words too. So always try to use the right word to express your thought. It's not that words themselves really paint an exact picture of things. As a matter of fact, they don't. Words often have a fuzzy or vague meaning rather than a clear, sharp one. But that's all the more reason why you must be as careful as you can in using words. It's partly because words are often vague in meaning that you must be tolerant in reasoning with others. You see, the meaning of a word may actually change depending on who says it, when he says it, or where he says it. Take the word lazy, for instance. Someone might say,
"Oh, the weather's so beautiful and warm today that it gives me a wonderfully lazy feeling."
Someone else might say,
Tommy Jones is a very lazy boy.
Now, when the lady said the word lazy, it meant something rather relaxing and pleasant. But when the boy used the word, he was being very critical. He meant something unpleasant by it. And the same is true of many words. So when you try to understand what someone else is thinking or saying, remember that his meaning for a word might not be the same as yours, and perhaps his meaning is just as good as yours, or better. So be tolerant, keep your mind open. Don't jump to conclusions. Rule number 7. Remember that no two things are ever the same. This rule goes against the way most people think about things and about other people. Most folks speak about oranges as if all oranges were the same. But the fact is that everything on earth is strictly one of a kind, even though it may have many qualities in common with others in its class. Even so-called identical twins are not really identical. I repeat, no two things in the universe are exactly the same. It's important to understand this, not only when talking about watermelons or twins or basketballs, but also about different kinds of human beings. Some people use words such as Negro or Catholic or Jew or Republican or baseball player as if all Negroes or baseball players and Jews and Republicans and so forth were the same. But of course they are not. No two Republicans are the same, no two Presbyterians are the same. I repeat, no two things of any kind are exactly alike in every detail. Now, it's all right to put people and things into what are called categories, but you must remember that within each category or group, the individual separate people or things are different from all the rest. No two things are ever the same, even though they may have the same name. So keep this point always in mind. You may look the whole world over, but you never will find that any other person that comes into view is just the same as you. Now, rule number 8. Don't be afraid to change your mind. You see, you can't be right about everything. I know I can't. Nobody can. That means you are wrong about some things. So you must try to find out just which of your opinions are mistaken. If new evidence shows that you're mistaken, you must respect that evidence. Intelligent people are glad to have new information, even if it forces them to change their minds about something. But people who are not very bright close their minds to new information, sometimes perhaps out of loyalty to opinions they've held for a long time. But the real loyalty we owe is to truth, not just to our own prejudices. Don't be afraid to change your mind, improve your mind, rearrange your mind. It'll help both you and our nation if you're open to new information. You see, a lot of things that may seem perfectly sensible are nevertheless wrong. For example,
The sun and the moon are about the same size.
they look the same size, but they're not. The moon is much smaller than the Earth. The sun is many times larger than the Earth. The reason they look the same size to us is that the sun is many millions of miles farther away. So you see that even what seems like common sense can sometimes lead you astray. Be very careful then in making up your mind about things. Remember, even after you have made up your mind, always admit the possibility that new evidence might make it necessary to change your mind. Don't be afraid to change your mind, improve your mind, rearrange your mind. It'll help both you and our nation if you're open to new information. You see, it's vitally important for Americans or any other people who live under a democratic form of government to think as clearly as possible. In a dictatorship, the government makes almost all decisions, and the people have little real power. But where the people do have the power to vote for candidates and to recommend laws, then they absolutely must think well about the business of governing themselves. Rule number 9. Remember that much truth is relative. You've heard that word before. A relative is somebody who's related to you. Let's say you're a daughter. Well, the word daughter has meaning only in relation to words like mother and father. Suppose today the temperature is 15 below zero, and then tomorrow it goes up to 30 degrees above zero. You might say,
Boy, it sure is getting warm.
but suppose the temperature had been 80 degrees above zero, and then it dropped to 30. Now you might say,
Gosh, it certainly is getting cold.
so you see, one day we say 30 degrees is warm. Another day we say 30 degrees is cold. In each case, the words cold and hot are relative. We decide that things are cold or hot, good or 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 bad, big or little, on the basis of how they relate or compare to something else. Is your chicken soup hot? Compared to what? Well, it's not compared to fire, but its temperature is higher than that of ice cream bars, though it's very much colder than the stars. Is your soda pop cold? 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 Your soda pop. So you've been told, but it's very much warmer than ice. So remember, my friend, to think twice before becoming much too sure about such words as rich and poor, hot and cold, or fast or slow. Even such words as stop and go. This advice to you I give: these things are relative. Well, we're just about at the end of our lesson now. I've given you 9 rules that'll help you to think better. They're not the only rules, but they'll get you off to a good start. What do they add up to? To another new word: logic. It's a very easy word to understand. It just means good, straight thinking and reasoning. It means, in part, that you can't believe 2 statements, 2 things, if one of the things disagrees with the other. For example, let's suppose someone says 2 things to you about the moon. First,
The moon is made of cottage cheese.
now here's the second statement about the moon.
The moon is made of various kinds of sand and rocks.
Now, can you accept or believe both of those statements? Of course not. It would be silly to believe both statements because one automatically rules out or excludes the other. They might both be wrong, you understand, but it's impossible that both of them could be correct. To understand that is to understand one of the basic ideas of logic. Next, here's an example that's a slight bit more complicated. This time we'll consider not just 2 statements, but 3. Here's the first one.
All Chinese have somewhat yellowish skin.
The second statement.
Shangli has somewhat yellowish skin.
And now the third statement, which is something that's decided on the basis of the first 2.
Shangli is Chinese.
Now let's assume that the first statement and the second statement are correct, that all Chinese do indeed have yellowish skin, and that Shangli has yellowish skin. The question is the lady correct when she says that Shangli is Chinese? Well, no, in this particular case, she is mistaken. Shangli happens to be a Korean. Koreans too have yellowish skin, and so do Japanese and Vietnamese and Cambodians and other peoples as well. Therefore, we were wrong in jumping to the conclusion that Shangli was Chinese. He might have been, but we did not have enough evidence to make up our minds. Now let's suppose that, 57% of the yellowish-skinned people on our planet are Chinese. If you had known that, then you could have said,
There is a 57% chance, or probability, that Shangli is Chinese.
Your guess about Shangli would still have turned out to be wrong, but at least you would have put it into proper words. You would have done the right kind of thinking, or reasoning, or guessing, and you would never have been foolish enough to argue that Shangli was Chinese with someone who said that he was not. But believe it or not, many people do argue, some of them almost every day of their lives, about things that they cannot possibly be sure of. What these people often do is make a guess about something, or just accept what somebody else tells them, and then, once they have formed an opinion or belief, they become very fond of that opinion, mostly, I suppose, because it's their own, and they will defend it very vigorously. If you contradict their opinion or criticize it, they feel that you're attacking or criticizing them personally. And because they reason so poorly, they get themselves into all sorts of trouble. Don't you make the same mistake. Let's think back now over our 9 rules for better thinking. Rule 1.
Control your emotions.
Rule 2.
Understand the difference between fact and opinion.
Rule 3.
Look for the evidence.
Rule 4.
Don't kid yourself. Tell it like it is.
Rule 5.
Remember the difference between the concrete and the abstract.
Rule 6.
Use words carefully.
Rule 7.
Remember that no two things are ever the same.
Rule 8.
Don't be afraid to change your mind.
And Rule 9.
Remember that most truth is relative.
It's always been important for man to think. Those who develop the knack find our world a much less puzzling and frightening place. They understand things better, and consequently they're better able to plan and control their activities than are people who think less well. Today, it's more important than ever before to think as clearly as possible, because now the world we all live in is more difficult in many ways than it ever was before. What the world needs now is young people who know how to think. Young people like you. If you get into some trouble, it may vanish like a bubble if you think. I said think. If you get into a hassle, let the dumb guys fight or wrestle. You just think. You think. Use your mind and you find the world's a much more interesting place. Someday your brain just might explain every single thing that puzzles the human race. If some person is displeasing, you might teach him how to reason if you think. I said think. Now Washington and Lincoln, they were very good at thinking, don't you think? Oh, think. Hey, you're not such a bargain if you don't use your brain. Depend on your noggin, it will help you explain. And it's practically never on the blink. So you think, you gotta think, 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 think.